now about 100 yards off. So I left Wattrelot and my spare horse hidden behind a shattered hovel and went alone towards the rick. But just as I was coming up to it, I heard a curious hissing noise which lasted for about a 20th part of a second, and above my head, how high I could not tell, vram, vram, 2 shells exploded with a tremendous noise. I ducked my head instinctively and tried to make myself as small as possible on my horse. A thought passed through my mind like a flash. Here we are. Why on earth did I come up here? My campaign will have been a short one. And then this other thought followed. But I'm not hit. That's all their shells can do. I shan't trouble to duck in future. And yet I was disagreeably impressed. A soldier who had been holding a horse just before, about 30 yards from me, ran down the slope, whilst the horse was struck dead and lay in a pool of blood, his body torn open. But I was now close to the officers composing the staff of the T Brigade. They came towards me, supposing, probably, that I was bringing some information or an order. One of them was known to me, an infantry captain who had been in garrison at R. with me. We shook hands, and I explained the object of this unusual visit. He replied: "Your regiment? You will find it to the left of the army corps. It's the regiment that ensures our liaison with the corps." "Well, Captain, it seems our troops are advancing. Things are going well." He shrugged his shoulders sharply. His eyes were hard and sombre as he gazed fixedly at the horizon in the direction of the enemy, and then said in an exasperated tone: "Certainly they are advancing. See those lines of skirmishers working along there to the right of the village, and those others further off, there where you see those puffs of yellow smoke? But that won't prevent us from beginning our retreating movement at noon. There are express orders. We must move together with the whole army. We shall sleep tonight 20 kilometres from here, and not in the right direction." We looked at one another in silence. I didn't like to ask any further questions, nor to express my disappointment and the angry feeling that was becoming stronger in me. The sight of General T calmed me at once. It seemed to tell me what my duty was, and to impose silent obedience and firm faith in our chiefs. Standing alone, 100 yards in advance of his officers, whom he had told to remain concealed behind the enormous stack, the General was observing the struggle. He stood perfectly still, and with his back slightly bent and his hands behind him. He had allowed his beard to grow, and it formed a white patch on his slightly tanned face. In front of him, at some little distance, 2 shells had just burst, falling short. The General had not stirred. He looked like a statue of sadness and of duty. I had thought of going and introducing myself, but now I felt I was too insignificant a being to intrude myself upon a chief who was watching the advance of his brave soldiers as a father watches over his children. I turned and I went away, quietly and slowly, with a feeling of oppression. So I made my way back again, skirting the firing line behind the ridge, often obliged to pull up to allow troops to pass to reinforce the line. Now and then it seemed that the fighting had ceased at the spot I happened to be in, but I soon found myself again in the thick of the artillery and rifle fire. On all the roads I crossed there was a continual stream of wounded men limping along, and stretcher bearers carrying mutilated bodies. The heat had become tropical. It was nearly 12 o'clock. My head began to swim. My shako seemed gradually to get tighter and to press on my temples till they were ready to burst. I thought I should never find my regiment. Never. I came to a small village and decided to stop and get some food for ourselves and for my horses, as they showed signs of distress. There, too, the streets were full of infantry, but, to my astonishment, none of them belonged to any of the regiments of my corps. So I supposed I had passed its left wing without knowing it. Bad luck. I rode up the steep alleys, looking for some inn where I could put up, but all the inns were filled with hot, footsore soldiers, who seemed thankful for a moment's rest. They were sitting about wherever there was any shade to be found, with their coats unbuttoned, their neckties undone, and shirts open. They were trying to recover their vigour by greedily devouring hunks of bread they had in their wallets, spread with the contents of their preserved meat tins. At the door of the vicarage, near the pretty little church which could be seen from the surrounding country, I saw an old priest who was distributing bottles of white wine to an eager crowd of troopers. I heard him say in a gentle voice: "Here, my lads, take what there is. If the Prussians come, I don't want them to find a drop left."
Mercy, mercy, Monsieur le Curé.
All at once there was a frightful explosion quite close to us, which made the whole church square quiver. A German coal box had fallen on to the roof of the church, making an enormous hole in it, out of which came a thick cloud of horrible yellow smoke. A shower of wreckage fell all around us and made a curious noise. The windows of all the houses came clattering down in shivers. In a twinkling the little square in front of the vicarage was empty. A few men who were wounded fled moaning. The rest slung their rifles and went off quickly in a line close under the shelter of the houses. I was left alone, face to face with the white-haired priest, who still held a bottle of golden wine in his hands. We looked at each other, greatly distressed.
"Tenez, Monsieur l'Officier,"
he said suddenly. "Take some more of this. I'm going to break all the remaining bottles, so that they shall not drink any of it. Ah, the savages! Ah, those wretches! My church, my poor church!" And he went across his little garden quickly, without listening to my thanks. I handed the bottle to Wattrelot, who stuffed it into his wallet with a smile of satisfaction. But a second coal box soon followed the first. It was certainly not the place to stay in, so I decided to be off and postpone my luncheon until I could find a rather more sheltered dining room. As I left the village I saw one of our batteries moving briskly away. It was the one that had been in action close to the village, and had probably been the target of the German gunners. It went rapidly down the slope. The drivers brandished their whips and brought them down upon the haunches of their jaded animals. They had to make their haste, for the position had become untenable. The German guns were concentrating their fire on the hapless village and the neighbouring ridge. The formidable shells burst in threes. The ground shook. It was evident that very soon nothing would be left there but ruins. I resumed my wanderings. I saw then that what the Captain had told me was true. The retreating movement was beginning to be obvious. Whilst the firing grew more intense along the whole line, small parties of infantry marched across the fields in an opposite direction to the one they had taken 2 hours previously. So we were beating a retreat. However, I had seen it with my own eyes. Not only had we held our ground along the whole line, but at several points our soldiers were making headway. And then suddenly, and without any apparent reason, we had to withdraw. It was enough to make one mad. We had to retreat over the soil of our France and give it up, little by little, to the hordes which followed on our heels. I had slackened rein, and was allowing my horse to go as he liked over the country strewn with troops. He seemed to understand what was happening, and with his head lowered, as though he did it reluctantly, he slowly followed the direction the immense army was taking. I was seized with a deep feeling of hopelessness.
I doubted everything. Our men, of whose bravery and tenacity I had seen proof, and our leaders, whose courage I knew. My head seemed to be on fire.
But I heard a ringing voice behind me, calling me by my name. I turned, and my sadness gave way to joy as I recognised 2 light blue tunics with red collars. I had found the uniform of my regiment, and my hope revived. I felt I was no longer alone, and that we might yet accomplish great things. In front of a score of our Chasseurs rode 2 good friends of mine, Lieutenant B. and Lieutenant of Reserve de C. What a pleasure it was to shake their hands, and to see their bronzed faces and dusty garments. We went on together, chatting merrily. C. knew the village where the regiment was to be billeted. We went straight for it at a trot. It was there, at that nightfall, that I was going to find my chiefs again, my comrades and my men, and I should at last take my part in the fighting. I could not know what the days to follow had in store for me, but I did know that none of them would be so cruel for me as the day when I went to the front. I was now in the bosom of my military family, and I looked forward to taking my share of danger at the head of the brave Chasseurs I knew so well. Doubtless I should now know where we were going, why we had to advance, and why to retire. It seems that moral suffering is less keen when it can be shared with others. I shall never suffer again what I suffered that day.
End of chapter 1. Recording by FNH. Visit www.bookranger.co.uk.